This is The Scream of the Haunted Mask, Chapter 5. I staggered back. I raised my hands to my cheeks. Jesse burst out laughing. Gotcha, he said. He gave me a hard shove. Gotcha, Carly Beth. He did a crazy dance around the room, laughing like a wild man. I felt like a total jerk. How stressed was I? I let a 5-year-old frighten me. Get a grip, Carly Beth. Mrs. Lange came trotting in. She never walks. She runs. She's a tall, heavy woman and looks older than my parents, with bright orange hair, rosy cheeks, and green eyes. She wears baggy plaid flannel shirts, long skirts down to the floor, and cowboy boots. She is a total energy machine. I've never seen her sit down, and she talks as fast as she moves. What are y'all doing indoors on such a beautiful day? She boomed. She gathered up empty drink cups. Get outside. Smell that fresh farm air. She picked something out of Colin's hair. She patted Angela's cheek. I know what. Go pick apples. They're falling off the trees. Get the buckets behind the house. Fill 'em up. Here? Go on, get. She practically shooed us out. Sabrina followed me out the door. This is a good idea, she said. Let them blow off some steam. Well, that's exactly what they did. The kids went tearing across the pasture, shouting and pushing one another and dancing and screaming. Sabrina and I grabbed buckets and ran after them. Hey, stick together, I shouted. I followed them into the thick tangle of apple trees. Stick together, don't get lost. The air grew cooler as we moved under the shade of the trees, and the ground, thick with leaves, grew soft and squishy. Jesse, don't throw apples, Sabrina shouted. Hey, stop. No throwing, I yelled. You could hurt somebody. Hey. Angela came running to me, crying and rubbing her head. Jesse hit me. I hugged her and gave her head a kiss. All better. Oh, yuck. Howard was making faces, bending over something in the leaves. Other kids hurried to join him. Oh, yuck, that's sick. I hurried over to them. Jesse was poking something with a stick. I peered down. A rotted apple bulging with purple worms. Barf, Howard groaned. Think I'm gonna barf. He held his hand over his mouth. I took him gently by the shoulders and moved him away. Just don't look at it, I said. You'll be fine. Sabrina and I shooed everyone away from there. They took off again, shouting and spinning through the trees. I held up 2 buckets in front of me. Hey, doesn't anyone want to pick apples? We came here to pick apples, Sabrina shouted. Hey, anyone? An apple sailed past my head. Several kids laughed. Stop it, Howard, I heard Harmony shout. That's so not funny. I couldn't see her. She stood behind the trunk of an apple tree. I could hear the crackle of leaves all around as kids ran in every direction. Ever get that helpless feeling? Sabrina asked me. I laughed. You were right. They are beasts, at least today. We followed the kids through the trees to the far side of the orchard. Some of them were jumping over a low wooden fence that had fallen over. A field of tall grass and weeds stretched beyond the fence. And in a corner of the field, I squinted into the late afternoon sun, a red ball just above the trees. What is that? I asked Sabrina, who stepped up beside me. It looks like a long house or shed, but what would a house be doing way back there? It's a stable, Sabrina said. She shielded her eyes from the sun with one hand. It's been abandoned for years. It's falling down. Yes, the windows were all broken. One wall had fallen. Part of the shingled roof had collapsed. I turned and saw Howard and Jesse darting across the field, pulling Harmony with them. They were heading for the empty stable. Come back, Sabrina shouted. Hey, you guys, come back. They giggled and kept running. Several other kids began to follow them. I cupped my hands around my mouth to shout to them, but I stopped when I heard the sound. I listened hard. Was that a horse whinny from the abandoned stable? Impossible, I told myself, but there, I heard it again. I poked Sabrina in the side. Did you hear that? She frowned at me. Hear what? I thought I heard something. A horse, maybe. Let's go check out the old stable, I said. I started pushing through the tall grass. No, wait. Sabrina grabbed my arm and held me back. Carly Beth, I know you love horses, but the stable looks dangerous. It's falling down. We should stop the kids. We have to get them back to Mrs. Lange. Come on, we'll just take a quick peek, I said. I grabbed Sabrina's hand and started to drag her through the field. We didn't get far. After 5 or 6 steps, we both heard a frightening voice yell from behind us. No, don't go there. Chapter 6. I spun around. Laura stood behind us at the edge of the apple orchard. Her blonde hair blew wildly around her face. She waved frantically, shouting for us to come back. So Sabrina and I rounded up the kids. They were pretty easy to herd back. The long walk and all the running and screaming had them tired out. Their parents and babysitters were waiting in the front room to take them home. Sabrina, Laura, and I stuffed them into their coats and hats, and they were gone. Silence. The only sounds now were the rattle of the old windows against the wind and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the front hallway. The 3 of us cleaned up the playroom. Then we headed to the kitchen. It was an enormous old farmhouse kitchen with a wide window along the back of the house, looking out on the pasture. Laura had a pot of hot chocolate on the stove. She poured it into tall white mugs. We sat down to sip it and relax at the kitchen table with its red and white checkered tablecloth. So what's the deal with the abandoned stable? I asked. Why did you yell like that? Laura slowly twirled her mug between her pale hands. Don't you know about that old stable? She asked us in a hushed voice. A hard gust of wind rattled the kitchen window. Sabrina and I shook our heads. We never walked there before, I said. Laura nodded. She took a sip of hot chocolate. It's a scary story, she said. Mrs. Lange told me the whole thing. It's actually very sad. I leaned forward. A scary story? What do you mean? Laura curled a strand of her hair between her fingers. She kept her eyes on the window. It was a riding stable many years ago, she started, very popular, with beautiful horses, well cared for and well groomed. She took another sip from her mug and held it between her hands. One night, people in the farmhouse heard screams, high-pitched shrieks and screams, not human screams. They knew they couldn't be human screams. I suddenly had a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. What do you mean? Who was screaming? I asked. The screams were shrill and frightened, Laura continued. They came from the stable. The horses were screaming. She twisted and untwisted her hair. I've never heard a horse scream. Have you? I swallowed. It must have been terrifying, but everyone went running to the stable. They pulled open the doors and found the horses dead, Laura said, all of them, lying against the wall in a heap, all dead. Huh? I gasped. Why? What killed them? Panic, Laura replied. They all died from fear. Sabrina had her hands up to her cheeks. Her dark eyes were wide with horror. But why? She asked. Wind rattled the window again. I shivered. I love horses. I wanted to work around school in the stable near my house. But they didn't have a job for me, so I ended up at Tumbledown Farms. The stable boy was blamed, Laura said. He sneaked into the stable one night. They think he wanted to scare the horse groomer, or maybe someone else in the stable. But he scared the horses instead? I asked. Laura nodded. You could hear them screeching and wailing for miles. They went insane. They were locked inside the stable, but they stampeded. They crushed each other against the door, against the stable walls. The stable boy fell under their hooves and was kicked to death. Oh, wow, I muttered. I glanced across the table at Sabrina. She hadn't taken a sip of her hot chocolate. She had her eyes down. That's the story, according to Mrs. Lange, Laura said. I warned you it was sad. Can you imagine opening the stable door and finding the horses in a heap dead? I swallowed hard. But how exactly did he scare the horses? I asked. Laura let out a long breath. Her face was even paler than usual. You'll never believe it, she said. The farmers claimed it was all caused by a mask, a hideous Halloween mask. Laura shook her head. But when they cleaned up the stable, the ugly mask was nowhere to be found. It totally disappeared. I heard a thud. I was so upset by Laura's story, I didn't even realize I'd knocked over my hot chocolate mug. The hot liquid ran down my jeans. Carly Beth, are you okay? I heard Sabrina, but I was too deep in thought to answer. Carly Beth, are you okay? Carly Beth? Chapter 7. Could she be talking about the same mask? I heard my heart pounded in my chest. I pictured the mask, so hideous with its wrinkled, warty green flesh, its crooked rows of jagged fangs. I glanced up. Sabrina was mopping up the spilled hot chocolate. She put a hand on my shoulder. Earth calling Carly Beth, she whispered. I blinked and focused on Laura. Did Mrs. Launch tell you anything else about the stable boy's mask? I asked her. She shook her head. No, just that there's a legend about it, about how it always appears at Halloween time. That sent a chill down the back of my neck. Laura narrowed her silvery gray eyes at me. Why are you so interested, Carly Beth? It's just so sad, I stammered. Know what's weird? Sabrina said. Carly Beth said she heard a horse whinny in that old stable. Laura squinted at me. No way. That's part of the story, that the ghosts of the horses remain in the stable. She heard a horse, Sabrina insisted. Definitely a horse whinny, right, Carly Beth? Before I could answer, Mrs. Launch came bursting in. Her arms were loaded down with fire logs. She dumped them in front of the old pot-bellied stove at the back of the kitchen. Are y'all talking about our famous haunted stable? She asked. She wiped her hands off on her long skirt. Then she grabbed a mug and emptied the hot chocolate pot into it. It's fun to tell ghost stories at Halloween, she said. I don't believe in ghosts, but you know what everyone says, don't you? That the old stable is haunted by those poor horses and by the stable boy? I stared at her. You mean the stable boy's ghost is still there? I asked. Mrs. Lounge nodded. They say he won't leave until he gets his Halloween mask back. I couldn't help myself. I let out a sharp cry. Across the table, Laura stared at me. What's wrong, Carly Beth? She asked. Mrs. Launch laughed. Maybe Carly Beth just doesn't like ghost stories, she said. Right, I said. My face suddenly felt hot. Scary stories always give me nightmares. I jumped up. Come on, Sabrina. The bus will be here any minute. Sabrina and I hurried to put on our coats. As we walked down the gravel path to the road, I knew we were both asking ourselves the same questions. Did the stable boy have the same mask all those years ago? The mask that's in my basement? And was the boy's ghost in the abandoned stable waiting to get it back? At dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about Laura's story. About the poor horses screaming their heads off, stampeding into the wall and dying in horrible panic. About the mask, the ugly, terrifying mask. Carly Beth, are you awake? Dad asked. Didn't you hear me asking about your job? No, sorry, I muttered. Maybe she's a zombie, my little brother Noah said. Let's see. He pinched my arm really hard. Hey, I jerked my arm away. Give me a break, Noah. Noah giggled and tried to pinch me again. Brat, you're worse than the 5-year-olds, I said. You're worse than the 4-year-olds, he said. Ooh, clever. Those kids must have run you ragged today, Mom said. She reached over and smoothed back my hair. Yeah, they were pretty wild, I muttered. You're worse than the 2-year-olds, Noah said, and giggled some more. Can I be excused? I asked. I hurried up to my room. I had a lot of homework, but I couldn't concentrate on it. I kept worrying about the haunted mask. I thought about last night, how it pulled me down to the basement against my will, how it forced me to take it out of its hiding place, how it almost made me pull it down over my head, how it screamed. I was so totally freaked last night, such a close call. Did I leave the metal box open? Did I lock it away? I couldn't remember. I paced back and forth in my room, thinking hard, thinking about the boy in the stable, the horses, the mask in the basement. I realized I had no choice. I had to make sure the mask was safely tucked in its hiding place. I had to be sure the box was locked tight. I crept out of my room and made my way down to the basement stairs. I could hear Mom and Dad in the den. They were shouting and cheering as guns fired and bombs exploded. My parents recently discovered video games. Almost every night after dinner, they were in front of the widescreen TV playing War Master 2 in high def. Totally weird. I gripped the handle to the basement door and took a deep breath. I didn't want to go down there. The scream of the mask still echoed in my ears, but I had to make sure I had it locked away. I pulled open the door, clicked on the basement light, and started down the steep wooden stairs. Again, they creaked under my feet. I made it halfway down. I could hear the loud hum of the furnace, and then, over that hum, I heard a whisper. I sucked in a deep breath and listened. Yes, a whispered voice, harsh and raspy. Carly Beth, Carly Beth, I'm here, Carly Beth. Chapter 8. A scream burst from my throat. My legs started to buckle. I grabbed the banister to keep from falling. The furnace hum turned into a roar in my ears. I struggled to hear the whispered voice. Silence now. Silence. And then a high-pitched giggle. I gasped. Noah! He stepped into the light at the bottom of the stairs and did a crazy dance. Noah, that's not funny, I choked angrily. I ran down the rest of the stairs and wrapped my hands around his scrawny neck. I could strangle you, you creep. He giggled some more and ducked out of my grasp. What are you doing down here? I cried. He grinned at me. You're always telling people how brave you are, Carly Beth, but I heard you scream. Did not, I shouted. Did too. I just screamed to give you a thrill, I said. Yeah, right. He rolled his eyes. Then he pushed me out of the way and darted up the stairs. Bye, chicken. He slammed the basement door behind him. I stood there, gazing around the basement, waiting for my heart to stop racing. Was Noah right? Am I brave now, or am I just pretending? No, stop thinking about it, I told myself. I wanted to be brave. I didn't want to be the scaredy cat Carly Beth from last year. I pushed my hair out of my eyes, took another deep breath, and started across the basement to the storage room. I stopped when I passed my horse posters on the playroom wall. The horses were so beautiful. Once again, I pictured the horrifying stampede of the screaming horses in that old stable. Would I ever be able to get the story out of my mind? I slowly stepped into the storage room and pulled the string to turn on the ceiling bulb. Blinking in the yellow light, I hurried to the pile of cartoons in the corner. Oh no. The black metal box. It sat on the basement floor in front of the cartons. Last night I locked the mask back inside, but I was so freaked I didn't hide the box away. Now I bent down and lifted it off the floor with both hands. Hey! I let out a sharp cry. The mask. It was bumping against the sides of the box, trying to escape. And this time, the whispered words didn't come from Noah. They came from inside the box. Almost Halloween. Almost Halloween. Chapter 9. A few days later, on Saturday afternoon, I was home babysitting Noah. So far, he wasn't any trouble. He was in his room, and I could hear him laughing. He was watching the shows he thinks are so hilarious on the Disney Channel. I was sitting in my room, staring at the bottle of the hair color I'd bought at the drugstore. My plan was to put some blonde highlights in my hair, a bold move. Maybe too bold. I decided to wait and talk to Sabrina about it. The phone rang and it was Sabrina. Did you hear about Sarah David? Sarah is a girl in our class who changes her hair color all the time, and she told us she's been wearing lipstick since she was 5. What about Sarah? I asked. She went to the mall to buy a birthday gift for her mother, and she got her nose pierced, Sabrina said. That's a weird birthday present, I said. We both laughed. She has a tiny little diamond in her nose, Sabrina said. Does her mother know? Did Sarah ask her first? I asked. No, Sabrina replied. She's not going to say anything. Sarah says no one ever pays any attention to her. She's going to wait and see if anyone in her family notices. Cool, I said. I heard Noah laughing his head off in the next room. I had an idea, said Sabrina. You're going to get your nose pierced? I asked. No, about school. You know that report we have to write about local legends? I think I'm going to write mine about that abandoned stable. I pictured the old stable, the walls falling in, tall grass growing over the doors. Such a creepy story. It will make a good report, Sabrina said. I'm going to interview Mrs. Lange next week, and I want to go take pictures inside the stable. Inside? I said. Yes, you know, all the empty stalls, Sabrina said. Come with me, okay? Want to go now? I can't, I said. I'm babysitting the Noah animal. I started to say I didn't want to go back to the stable anyway, but I quickly changed my mind. This was the perfect time to prove that I was over my fears. How about tonight after dinner? Sabrina asked. Sure, I said. Meet you at the bus stop. I took a deep breath. It was just an abandoned stable. What could happen? Chapter 10. The sun was dropping behind the trees as Sabrina and I rode the bus to the edge of town. I watched the shadows creep over the passing houses and lawns. We climbed off the bus at Tumbledown Farms. I saw only one light on in an upstairs window of the farmhouse. We turned away from the gravel path and made our way around the apple orchard. Insects buzzed in the field behind the house. I led the way to the stable, pushing the tall grass aside to make a path for us. The hard dirt crunched under our shoes. I heard animals scampering through the dry grass and weeds. The sky grew darker. Clouds covered the moon. I shivered as a gust of cold wind blew inside my jacket. I brought a flashlight, Sabrina said. I heard a click, and a circle of white light swept over the grass. Look, there's the table. Sabrina raised the light higher. I could see the long, low building, black against the pink-gray sky. Ow! I cried out as a sharp pain stung my forehead. A mosquito in October? I slapped at it, too late. Come on, it's getting really dark, Sabrina said. She started to run. The beam of light bounced on the ground in front of her. Wait up, I called. My eyes were on the stable. The boards on one wall... The boards on one wall were cracked and rotting away. Another wall had fallen in. Weeds grew out of the windows. The window shutters were all broken and tilting to the ground. We hurried along the side of the stable toward the front. I stopped when my shoes sank into something soft. Sabrina, look, I called, but she was at the doors and didn't hear me. I stared down at my shoes. I was standing in a small square of soft, chunky dirt. It looked as if it had been freshly dug up. A disturbing thought flashed into my mind. It's a small grave. But that was crazy. Who would dig a grave back here? I kicked the dirt off my shoes and joined Sabrina at the double doors. One door was wide open, solid blackness inside, and the sour smell of straw and dirt and decay. I could feel my heart start to pound a little harder. Birds cried in the trees behind us, as if warning us to stay away. I heard the low hoot-hoot of a barn owl. I grabbed Sabrina's arm. What's wrong? She asked. I brought something, I said. I held up a plastic bag I'd been carrying. I pulled out a bunch of carrots. Sabrina raised the flashlight. Carrots? Carly Beth, why? I shrugged. I don't know why, I said. For the ghost horses, I guess. She rolled her eyes. Are you getting weird or what? You don't really believe in ghost horses, do you? I didn't answer. I took Sabrina's hand and pulled her through the open door into the dark stable. The sour smell grew stronger. The air felt heavy, cold, and damp, like stepping into a refrigerator. The wind banged a shutter against the side of the stable. Our shoes slid on dry straw as we walked toward the horse stalls. I tripped over a metal bucket and sent it rolling across the dirt floor. Careful, Sabrina whispered. She handed me the flashlight. Hold this while I take pictures. She raised her hand and clicked it on. I set the bunch of carrots down in front of the first stall. Then I swept the flashlight beam around the stable. The light rolled over 2 rows of stalls with low wooden walls. They stretched all the way to the back of the stable. A shredded blanket lay over one of the stall walls. It looked as if animals had chewed it to tatters. A high mound of straw was piled inside the first stall. I lowered the light to it, and a fat brown mouse leaped out and scurried under the wall. Startled, I jumped back. The light bounced up to the stable roof. Were those bats clinging upside down to the low rafters? Sabrina was busy flashing photo after photo. I pointed to the ceiling, and she flashed some pictures of the bats. Over here, she whispered. We made our way down the row of stalls. The air grew warmer and damper as we stepped deeper into the stable. Carly Beth, move the light, Sabrina said. Check that out. She pointed to a tall wooden stool lying on its side on the stable floor. She picked it up, set it down, and dusted it off with one hand. Do you think the stable boy sat on this stool? She asked. Wouldn't that be totally weird? She didn't give me a chance to answer. She climbed onto the stool and shoved the camera into my hands. Take my picture sitting on this. It will be great for the front of my report. I raised the camera to my eye and clicked the shutter. The flash caught Sabrina sitting on the stool with both hands raised above her head in triumph. I flashed another one. The burst of light lingered in my eyes. I tried to blink it away. The tall stool appeared to glow in the lingering circle of light. Did the poor stable boy sit on that stool so long ago? Did it get knocked over in the stampede of panicked horses? I tried to force those thoughts from my mind, and then I heard a thud, a bumping sound from one of the back stalls. Sabrina, did you hear that? My voice came out in a hushed whisper. She froze beside me. Yes, I heard it, she whispered. We both stood still, listening hard. A shiver ran down my neck. I have this weird feeling, I murmured, like we're being watched. It had to be a mouse or a raccoon or something, Sabrina said. Another bump, and then I heard the rustle of straw. Then I heard something that sent a cold shudder down my spine.